Have you ever wondered how a simple request could change a life? Comment below where you're watching from as we dive into this moving story. The cold autumn wind that morning cut my face like a razor as I walked through the still deserted city streets. The sound of dry leaves dragging across the ground mingled with the soft creak of a poorly fitted wooden door's hinges, reminding me of a time when I still believed everything in life had an explanation, that each person carried a visible reason for their choices. I woke up too early that day, my chest heavy with omens I couldn't name, and I felt something greater awaiting me beyond the stone corners of that city, forgotten by tourists. Ibrahim Traoré used to tell me that fate surprises us precisely when we think we're in control, and that's why I was taken aback to see him sitting at that old, worn wooden table, hands clasped in his lap, his gaze fixed on the void, as if carrying the weight of the world. His eyes, as dark as a moonless night, seemed to meld into the darkness itself, but when he raised his gaze and looked at me, I felt I was standing before someone who had learned to bear life's weight without ever giving up on dreaming. A steaming cup of coffee sat before him, its strong, bitter aroma reminding me of my childhood at my grandmother's house, when she boiled water on the wood stove and said coffee was the only thing keeping us awake to face the storms of the soul. Ibrahim Traoré didn't say anything right away. He just took a deep breath and let the silence speak for him. It was as if each sigh carried memories of undeclared wars, battles fought behind the scenes of life, and open wounds that would never fully heal. There, at that simple table, he seemed to carry not only the weight of his own story, but also the pain of everyone who had ever crossed his path. His gaze lingered on the small things, the reflection of sunlight on worn cutlery, the dust gathering in the corners of the floor, the creak of the floorboards that seemed to weep under the weight of memories. I could see in his restrained gestures the dignity of someone who had learned that life offers no easy answers, only questions that transform us. That's when I heard that fragile voice beside me, and everything stopped. "Can I eat the leftovers, sir?" asked the child. So thin his bones seemed ready to pierce his skin, his large dark eyes fixed on the remnants of food still steaming in the bowl in front of Ibrahim Traoré. I felt myself swallow hard, because in that moment, all my certainties crumbled like a house of cards. The smell of warm bread, mixed with the bitter-sweet aroma of the soup still left in the bowl, seemed to envelop me in a thick fog. I sensed the scent of wet earth, the sound of the wind moaning through the cracks of poorly sealed windows, and the cold sent shivers down my spine. That boy wasn't just a boy. He was a mirror of the hunger within each of us, a hunger not satisfied by food alone, but one that demands affection, compassion, care. Ibrahim Traoré took a moment to respond, and in that silence, something shifted. I saw his trembling lips, the moist glimmer in the corners of his eyes, and I understood that this man wasn't made only of strength and courage, but also of humanity, tenderness, and memories that kept him alive. He took a deep breath, lifted his head, and looked at the boy as if gazing into his own soul. "Of course, my son," he said, his voice hoarse as if carrying an ancient weariness. "You can eat what's left. But first, sit with me. I want to hear you." In that instant, I felt time stop. The noise of voices in the street faded, and the clinking of spoons against coffee cups became a distant echo. The boy hesitated for a moment, then pulled up the wooden chair, as fragile as he was, and sat down slowly, as if afraid to break the little that remained. Ibrahim Traoré rested his elbows on the table and looked at the boy with an expression that mixed pain and tenderness, as if seeing beyond flesh and bone. The boy trembled, his hands dirty with earth, his nails bitten, his eyes wide as if fearing he'd be sent away at any moment. But Ibrahim didn't shoo him off. Instead, he began to speak, softly, deliberately, as if each word had to break through a wall of silence to exist. He told the boy about his own childhood, how he learned to endure pain before he even learned to read. He spoke of the mother who taught him the strength of silence, and the father who left before teaching him to smile. Each word Ibrahim spoke felt like a stone thrown into a dark lake, creating ripples that spread through the room and hit my chest, awakening memories I'd rather forget. As he spoke, I watched the boy's expression change, first fear, then curiosity, and finally something I could only describe as hope. It was as if Ibrahim were building right there, an invisible bridge between two broken souls. There was a fire in Ibrahim Traoré's eyes that refused to go out, a stubborn flame that withstood the cold morning wind. As he spoke, his fingers tapped the edge of the table, keeping the rhythm of a song only he knew. Each gesture seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories, of battles won and defeats turned into lessons. I could smell the coffee cooling in the cup, hear the soft clink of the spoon against the porcelain rim, and catch the distant scent of burning wood, a memory of old fireplaces, all of it mingled with the sound of the boy's breathing, which grew calmer with each word Ibrahim spoke. In that moment, suspended in time, I realized it wasn't just the boy who needed to eat. We all did. To feed on compassion, patience, listening. Ibrahim Traoré didn't just offer the boy the leftovers of food, but also the remnants of his soul, his humanity. And I, sitting at that table, felt that the miracle wasn't in the bread or the soup, but in the simple act of staying by someone's side, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. The boy looked up at Ibrahim, and in that gaze were more questions than any words could hold. His small face, marked by the lines of a short life, told stories of fears and uncertainties no child should know. I noticed he trembled slightly, not just from the cold seeping through the window's cracks, but from the uncertainty the world had planted in his chest. Ibrahim, however, didn't look away, didn't feign haste or impose distance. He just took a deep breath, as if understanding that sometimes miracles begin in silence. The faint morning light streamed through the window's cracks, casting shadows on Ibrahim's face that reminded me of old portraits of weary heroes, men who had seen the worst of humanity, yet still insisted on believing in the good. His teary eyes reflected something I couldn't name, a blend of pain and hope that transformed with every gesture he made. I saw him push the bowl of soup toward the boy, and it wasn't just food he was offering. It was an invitation to dignity, to belonging, to the human warmth we so often lack. The boy's eyes widened, as if he couldn't believe someone would give him something without asking for anything in return. His hands trembled as he held the spoon, and I noticed Ibrahim's care in not rushing him, in respecting every second of that simple yet profound act. Each spoonful seemed to carry not just the weight of hunger, but also of hope. I, watching in silence, felt a tear roll down my cheek, a tear I didn't even know I could still shed. Memories of my own childhood haunted me in that moment. I remembered when, still small, I asked for breadcrumbs at the neighbor's house, after my exhausted mother told me there was nothing left to eat. I recalled how the smell of fresh bread made me salivate, and how shame made me lower my eyes. And it was there, sitting at that wooden table, that I realized hunger isn't just the absence of food, it's also the absence of love, of care, of someone who truly sees us. Ibrahim seemed to understand all this without needing to say a word. He let the boy eat in silence while his own eyes traveled to distant places, perhaps known only to him. I noticed him fidgeting in his coat pockets, as if searching for something, and then he pulled out a small wooden amulet, delicately carved, depicting a tree with twisted branches and deep roots. It was as if that object held ancient stories, family memories, or perhaps just a symbol of something he didn't want to forget. He twirled the amulet between his fingers, and I wondered how many times he had done that, how many sleepless nights he must have held that object, as if clinging to a thread of hope. The boy, curious, looked at the amulet and then at Ibrahim, as if expecting him to reveal the secret it held. Ibrahim smiled, a brief and weary smile, and said, "This reminds me of where I came from. It reminds me that, even on the hardest days, there's a root that sustains me." His words echoed in the room like an ancient chant. It was as if each syllable opened a door in my chest, inviting me to revisit my own roots, my own pains and joys. The boy, holding the spoon with both hands, raised his head and asked softly, "And me, sir? Do I have a root too?" The question pierced me like a blade, because it wasn't just his, it was mine. It was all of ours, seeking belonging amidst the chaos. Ibrahim took a few seconds before answering, as if each word needed to be chosen carefully, carved with patience. "Everyone does, my son," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "Even if life sometimes makes us forget, the roots are there, waiting for us to water them again." And in that moment I knew something had changed. It wasn't just the boy who had been fed, it was also me, who had received a lesson in humanity I would never forget. The smell of cold coffee in the cup brought me back to the present. I noticed Ibrahim sipping slowly, as if savoring each gulp not for its taste, but for the time the moment offered. He raised his eyes and looked at me, as if inviting me to speak, to say something I'd been holding back for too long, but words failed me. I just smiled faintly, a timid but genuine smile, and he seemed to understand. Sometimes silence speaks louder than any speech, and in that silence there was something sacred, something that connected that small table to every table in the world. The boy finished eating, leaving only a few crumbs on the bowl's rim. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and looked at Ibrahim as if unsure what to say. I could see in his eyes a mix of gratitude and fear that this moment was just a dream, that the kindness he'd just experienced was as fleeting as the steam from the coffee that had already dissipated into the air. Ibrahim stood up slowly, as if carrying the weight of many journeys, and placed his hand on the boy's head. "You're not alone," he said, in a tone so gentle it felt like a prayer. "As long as I live, as long as the world breathes, you'll have a place at the table." His words hung in the air like incense, filling every crack in that room with a scent of hope. The boy took a deep breath, his eyes shining with something I could only call faith. That's when I noticed the sounds of the street creeping back in. Distant horns, the creak of a cart's wheels, the bark of a lonely dog. The world went on outside, indifferent to the silent miracle that had taken place in that room. But for me, nothing would ever be the same. I knew I had witnessed something rare, a miracle that couldn't be explained in words but was felt in the skin, in the air, in the heart. Ibrahim Traoré hadn't just given food to that boy, he had given dignity, courage, and above all, a piece of himself. And I, who was there only to observe, felt part of that story, as if I too had received something I didn't know I was missing. The silence that followed those words carried the weight of an entire century. Ibrahim Traoré stood there, his hand resting on the boy's head, as if sealing an ancient promise that not even time would dare erase. I saw his eyes fixed on something beyond the walls of that room, as if contemplating the memories of an entire life, and perhaps that's exactly what it was, because there was something eternal in his posture, something that reminded me of old prophets who spoke of hope even when everything seemed to collapse. The boy, still seated, looked up with a mix of surprise and reverence. It was as if in that moment he understood the value of each gesture, each word, each fragment of silence Ibrahim had offered him. A timid smile appeared on his face, and I could see life blossoming where there had been only fear. The smell of cold coffee still lingered in the air, mixed with the distant scent of damp wood and wet earth, and it brought me back to reality. To that reality we so often ignore while chasing dreams and goals that say nothing about what truly matters. Ibrahim sat back down, his movements slow as if carrying the weight of 1,000 stories on his shoulders. His fingers twirled the wooden amulet with the delicacy of someone caressing the past. That's when I noticed something different in his gaze. Not just pain, but also a trace of joy, a spark of hope that insisted on shining even in the darkest nights. He raised his face and looked at me, and in his eyes I found not only strength, but also a vulnerability few would dare reveal. "You know," he said, his voice hoarse, "sometimes I think about everything I've seen, everything I've lost. I think about the battles I've fought, the people left behind, the dreams I had to bury to keep going, and I realize that in the end it all comes down to this, being present for those who need us." He paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and his gaze drifted to the empty cup before him. Life isn't measured by the victories we collect, but by the hands we hold along the way. His words echoed within me, mingling with the distant sound of the street that insisted on reminding me, the world doesn't stop just because something important happened. I felt a lump in my throat, and I wished that conversation would never end, that we could stay there in that small island of compassion, while the rest of the world busied itself chasing the wind. But I knew life doesn't wait, that time has no patience for miracles, and that soon everything would return to how it was, or almost. The boy stood up slowly, his eyes still glued to Ibrahim's. His small hands clutched the wooden amulet Ibrahim had given him, as if holding a treasure. I knew that for him it wasn't just an object, it was a reminder that someone saw him, believed in him, gave him value. And I realized that deep down we all carry our own wooden relics, memories, amulets, promises, that help us remember where we came from and who we are. Ibrahim stood up too, and extended his hand to the boy. "Go in peace, my son," he said, in a tone that blended blessing and farewell. "Always remember, no matter what happens out there, you have a root inside you." And I saw, in the boy's eyes, the reflection of that root, firm, alive, pulsing, as if, suddenly, everything made sense. The boy smiled, a timid but grateful smile, and ran out the door carrying with him the amulet and the silent miracle he had just received. We stayed there, Ibrahim and I, enveloped in a heavy silence, as if each of us needed time to process what had happened. The wind outside sang its ancient song, mingling with the soft creak of the door still swaying in the breeze. Ibrahim leaned back in the chair, ran his hand over his short beard, and sighed deeply. "You know," he said, his voice breaking, "sometimes I think we're all survivors of something we can't explain. Each of us carries scars no one sees, and that's why we need each other." I looked at him, at that man so often called a leader, a hero, a warrior, and realized that in that moment he was none of those things. He was just human, like me, like the boy, like all of us. And I understood that in the end, the only thing that truly matters is being present, offering a place at the table, a listening ear, a piece of bread, or hope to those who need it. Ibrahim stood up, adjusted his coat with slow gestures, and looked at me with those eyes that seemed to see beyond the walls, beyond the wounds. "Thank you for being here," he said, and I knew he wasn't speaking just to me. He was speaking to every one of us who at some point in life needs someone to offer more than food, to offer compassion. We left that room together, and the timid morning sun began to warm the stone ground. The cold wind still cut my face, but something inside me had changed. I walked beside Ibrahim Traoré, my heart both heavy and light. I knew that from then on, I would carry that moment with me forever, like an invisible amulet, a reminder that even leftovers can become a feast of humanity when offered with love. On the street, the sounds of life resumed, the noise of people coming and going, the clinking of coins, the rustling of dry leaves. But I knew that for me everything had changed. And in the silence between one step and another, I discovered that the miracle wasn't in the bread or the soup, but in the gaze of someone who welcomes us, even when everything seems lost. The end.